Years ago, after many years with a soldering iron, hours in the library reading about filing patents, and a lifetime developing a pathetic look which seemed to be magnetic to all those people ready to give me advice, I was ready to take the huge step into entrepreneurship. Armed with a prototype and bursting with enthusiasm, I picked up the phone and got airtime on a high-profile new invention TV program called Tomorrow's World. That led to a host of exciting calls from organizational heads interested in commercializing my inventions. Shortly after, the UK indulged in its national pastime of heading into a recession. "We're focused on our core business right now," was now the comment from all those who were once enthusiastic. My vision for licensing agreements, royalties, they just vaporized like a helium balloon landing on a barbecue. So I cleared off the kitchen table, plugged in the soldering iron again, and went into business. 12 years later, after 100% per year growth, and having moved from England to Florida, I was burning up 250,000 air miles a year, doing half a dozen trade shows around the world. Everything was going swimmingly, in an exhausting kind of way. One sunny June day, we had just set up our booth at a trade show in Chicago's McCormick Place. Last-minute adjustments to the brochures had been made. I was wondering if there were enough mints in the candy dish. Adrenaline was high, and the show door was about to open. And my phone rang. Twice. The first call was from an English hospital. Time spent in a prisoner of war camp and a lifetime of smoking had finally taken its toll, and my weeping mother told me that my stepfather had passed away. The second call was from my secretary in Florida, sheepishly letting me know that my manager hadn't showed up to work for the last 2 days. He was supposed to be in Chicago the following day to help me man the booth, and then when I flew to London for the second trade show on the tour, he would be manning it on his own. I'd forgotten Dave was an alcoholic, but despite 3 years on the wagon, Dave's addiction had finally got the better of him, and it was back to rehab. There is no good time for either of these events, but I survived. The business survived, and no one could have told the difference, except me. I felt a difference. Sleepless night after sleepless night, difficulty focusing, no motivation. Excitement had crossed that razor edge into exhaustion and burnout. I persuaded my then wife to go back to the UK. I started grooming my business for sale, and I pushed all my friends away. All but one. "I really can't see you today, Jim. I've just got too much to do," I would say. A while later, there would be a knock on the door, and there was Jim with a brown bag and something healthy to eat inside it. After a few days, he gave me a piece of paper and said, "Just call that number and talk to Dana. She's a meditation teacher." I am eternally grateful to Jim. After day one of 3 meditation lessons, I had the first decent night's sleep I'd had in many, many months. I was turning the corner. Burnout can be invisible. It doesn't show up on our calendars, but it invades our mornings when we dread getting out of bed, into our work days when we can't focus, and into our evenings when exhaustion and the dread of another sleepless night replace recreation or relaxation. No matter what we try and think about, our focus returns to our misery. Like a racehorse with blinders, we can see nothing but our burnout. This process I call convergent thinking. And we see this in everyday conversation when we refer to drilling down and focusing in. It's a symptom of the way we've been coaxed to think as modern adults. Today, 3 decades after my bout with burnout, we are in the age of burnout, the silent epidemic. It gets masked by the dreaded, "I'm fine, just busy." We don't talk about it. It may be perceived as weakness. An alarming half the workforce in the US report having been burned out. And another 30% tell us they have a colleague, spouse, friend that's been afflicted by this silent epidemic. Half of US professionals report having experienced burnout in their current jobs, and half of those will have it recur within 18 months. These are really scary figures. This costs the country $250 billion in medical costs. When you account for loss of work and performance, it's been estimated to cost us over $1 trillion. But these calculations do not include the devastation to families and other relationships, associated illness, and even suicide. We don't know the exact numbers for all of this because medical professionals do not identify burnout as a distinct illness, preferring to subsume it under the heading work-induced stress. So we don't know how many of the 6 suicides that occur every hour in this country are related to burnout, but we do know that 2/3 are linked to depression, and multiple studies confirm a strong link between burnout and depression. The descriptor work-induced stress has a couple of problems in my book. First, it's not restricted to the workplace. Burnout has no boundaries. Whether it starts at home or in the workplace, it will invade your life wherever you are, whatever you are doing. Second, I define stress in a slightly different way. I believe it is what happens when someone does not have the resources to cope with a challenge. Like an old wooden ruler, as you bend it more and more and more, it's just fine. And then suddenly the stress on one end becomes too much and it will snap. Notice that this requires that the responsibility be at least shared by the individual, as opposed to simply examining what it is in the workplace that caused the problem. It's also important to note that women are more likely to suffer from burnout than men. So although burnout is a term often used loosely, it is a very serious condition. And the reason I've devoted many years into researching its causes and possible cures is because I believe that it has responsibility for a lot more damage than we initially see. Earlier, I mentioned the convergent thinking that prevents us from seeing our world from all directions. And I want to share with you now how that way of thinking is what we all had as children. And it can be an antidote to burnout because creative thinking is divergent thinking. Have you watched 2 or 3-year-olds explore their world and try and make sense of it? Every day when my granddaughters were young, they would show me some new thing or idea, and I could see them trying to use it to make sense of their world, as if they were taking a new puzzle piece and trying to fit it into a partly completed jigsaw puzzle. Sometimes they'd try and force the piece where it didn't really fit. The vegetable strainer became an ancient warlord's battle helmet. Bar of soap became a cell phone. They were thinking divergently. To fit a piece into a jigsaw puzzle, you need to look at the whole puzzle, especially when you don't have a picture on the lid. This is creative thinking. Seeing the world not through the microscope of convergence, but through the wide-angle lens of divergent thinking. How many of you love to travel, I wonder? And by travel, I'm not talking about 4 seasons kind of traveling. I mean, really traveling to new places to absorb the culture of the country. I have lived and worked in 7 different countries and vacationed in many more. I'm a culture junkie. And when I went to a new country, Egypt or India particularly, every hour of the day, subconsciously, my mind took in 360 degrees of my new environment, not knowing what I was going to see next, but knowing it would be different. That is also divergent thinking. Making sense of a new world requires looking at the whole picture, just as it did when we were young. By the way, creativity itself is difficult to measure directly. So social scientists like myself often use divergent thinking tests as a proxy for measuring creativity. So it is well established that creative thinking is inherently divergent. Unlike when we were young, as socialized adults, our thinking changes. We have some history to guide us. Now, faced with a decisional challenge, our subconscious scurries off to riffle through its memory banks to see if we have seen anything similar before. If we have, then we use that historical data to guide our actions. This saves us time and energy. It's also a great strategy for saving both of those things. Ever wonder why young kids sleep so soundly? They're catching some Z's in the back of the car. You pick them up, try not to trip on the front step or smack their heads on the door frame, shake them up a bit, taking them upstairs, and they're still sound asleep. Well, thinking in the way that I've described uses as much energy as going for a walk, using upwards of a staggering 30% of the body's energy. I call it the Brainiac diet. You didn't just expect dietary advice today, did you? But as adults, our brains are continually looking for shortcuts. It's the original energy conservation machine. And using the pre-written scripts that we have from our history, that we develop based on our previous experience, which are called schemas, by the way, they're really efficient shortcuts, and they provide structure also that feels very comfortable for us. We all need some degree of structure. But they erode that youthful, divergent way of thinking. So we tend to be more analytical and deductive as we become adults. And our thinking style becomes more convergent and less creative. Think of this to some extent as reducing our curiosity as we age, as we become socialized adults. When we watch our kids or grandkids ask why 1,000 times, when they try, fail, laugh, and try again, they are creating new neural connections. No longer flexing this creative thinking muscle as we get older causes it to weaken. It means that the deductive, analytical side of our brain takes over more and more. This is particularly visible when we're under stress, when a phenomenon called seizing and freezing occurs. This means that when we're faced with a decision, we choose the first solution that comes to mind and we freeze the search for other options. You might think of this as knee-jerk reaction. This is one more reason why we may fail to find a creative option. We're just looking at the one obvious option and that's the end of it. Like that racehorse with blinders, we see just one way forward. As adults, then, most of us have traded creative thinking for analytical, deductive, convergent neural pathways. Our brains are continually finding shortcuts and analyzing in this increasingly logic-driven world. The problem is that neural pathways that relate to this thinking mode need a balance. This was not always an issue. Our reliance on deduction and analysis is relatively recent. Ever wondered why gravity was only first described in 1666? Centuries, millennia in fact, of ancient cultures trying to explain the world, but they didn't do so analytically. Today, creativity may be enjoyed, but it seldom garners very much in the way of respect. Back when sex was safe and skydiving was dangerous, I was a long-haired teenager plugged into a guitar amp in my garage. Any suggestion that one could make a living being creative was met with sarcasm and derision. Over a family dinner, I made the strategic error of suggesting that I might be a musician when I finished school. An ornery uncle started to giggle. "So," he said, "you want to be a rock star, do you? You do know the difference between a musician and a large pizza, don't you?" "Well, at least the large pizza can feed a family of 4. Even now, it is often technology-related professions that are respected for their contribution to innovation and economic growth. This non-stop focused thinking causes us to look at our world through a microscope. We lose the ability to see the big picture. We desperately need the divergent balance that is creative thought. Consider these two modes of thought as being at either end of the scale. We need to move the needle from convergence towards divergence so that we can switch to either at will. Like a jazz musician playing in a concert with a band until it's her turn to improvise. Then it's creativity time. If you've been with someone with depression or burnout, you may have noticed that it's very difficult or even impossible for them to think about the future. That is convergence. And when we can't see the future, we can't see the options, and we lose hope. It's not that you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, it's that you can't even find the tunnel. What we need to do is to reverse this trend of thought, and to overcome burnout is to add divergent thinking into neural pathways. These are discrete neural pathways, and we need to add these divergent thinking neural pathways and bring our cognitive processes back into balance. Thankfully, the two ways of thinking I've described, convergent and divergent, are not mutually exclusive. At any moment, our subconscious will choose one over the other. But both thinking processes can coexist as options. This means that our individuality can coexist with our social self. Our jazz musician, going from playing the melody to improvisation, is switching from conforming to stepping out and displaying their individuality. Both of these are innate human drives, and both are important to the survival of our species. Although they are somewhat in opposition, wanting to be similar to others is about our need to be connected with others, isn't it? In other words, our similarity with others becomes salient when we're with other people. On the other hand, the drive to step out requires that we display our individuality by displaying our difference from others. Otherwise, we'd never create anything new, would we? We all have both these drives to some extent, and always have since we were living in caves. Back in my early 20s, I hitched to Greece and lived in a cave, and I'm sure I still had some creativity. The creativity, then, is the start of our social evolution. Think about it for a moment. We don't have the internet, the jet engine, the iPhone, just because we've got opposable thumbs. We have those because we have always had the drive to be creative and use that as a way of bettering our lives. And maybe this is a pathway to resolving burnout. It's interesting to note that research consistently ranks the US as having one of the most individualistic cultures in the world, and it's also one of the most innovative. That fits well with this model, doesn't it? Those of you that have participated in creative problem solving may have wondered why brainstorming seldom generates as many unique ideas as was anticipated. Once again, this model would support it, wouldn't it? We're putting together a group, it's creative, and they're at opposite ends of the spectrum. They're contrary to each other. So how do we resolve burnout? By rediscovering creative thinking. This is about a mind shift to one that uses new divergent neural pathways, ones that recreate those that we had when we were very young. To reopen those youthful doors, we need to break patterns, introduce novelty, and open our minds to new possibilities. And that shift is deeply restorative. When I was talking about burnout, I talked about how those with burnout tended to be trapped in a hamster wheel of convergence, going round and round without being able to see the bigger picture. Big picture creative thinking helps remove those blinders and counteracts the convergent way of viewing the world, and being able to recognize the possibilities and options that our future actually holds. Stress, anxiety, and burnout go hand in hand. Breaking the cycle of reinforcement of these factors occurs when we discover that we have options. I wonder how many of you have at some time been in a situation where you feel trapped with very few options. Perhaps at work, perhaps in a relationship. You don't have to be incarcerated to know that very few options can lead to focused hamster wheel thinking and often depression. We like to have options and we like to know what they are. Trying to solve problems and make plans that accommodate for the unknown is very difficult when we think convergently. We need to go back to putting pieces into a jigsaw. We have to return to being able to look at big picture thinking and to be able to create options. Those knee-jerk, we have always done it this way kind of choices that can sneak into the way we think about things and how we make our decisions, they're not creative thinking, and they seldom lead to the most successful outcomes. Let me share with you a few ideas from my book that I use to guide my burnout clients to think more creatively. It's all about shaking the snow globe and breaking away from our usual patterns of thought and behavior. Change your everyday activities. If you don't do so already, incorporate a walk into your regimen. For sound neurological reasons, walking has lots of positive outcomes. Ever had someone tell you to look up when you go to the walk because it's mood improving? It's true. And maybe because you see the world from a wider angle, which is a part of the creative thinking process. And it's been found, by the way, to correlate with happiness. Try a cup of ginger tea and start your day in the morning rather than automatically heading for the coffee maker. If you go to your favorite restaurant, choose a different item from the menu, or even choose a different restaurant. Get with your family and friends and agree on a new recreation you can all enjoy. Find a nearby park. Plan a picnic for the weekend. When planning a vacation or even moving house or other goals for the future, make a dream board. I will never forget Jim's advice when I had burnout. I'm now a 35-year meditator, and I was gratified to read a study connecting neural pathways related to creativity to those seen when people are meditating. So that's another of my recommendations. When you get up in the morning, think of something beautiful that you can just reflect on for a moment. When I opened the curtains some 2.5 hours ago now in our bedroom this morning, the snow-capped peaks of the Sierra Nevada were pink as the sun was rising. It was a beautiful sight. Beauty is there for us to find. And when we find it, let's reflect on it for just a few seconds and just absorb that beauty. That is part of the creative process. We don't have to be actually painting a picture or making a sculpture to be part of the creative thinking process. Writers and painters didn't start to do that until they had absorbed some of the beauty that came from their profession. Finally, when you make everyday decisions at work or at home, make them with intention. Notice if you have the urge to make knee-jerk decisions and stop yourself. Really think about the options that you have. Initially, this is a lot of extra cognitive effort, and it can be tiring, but persist. It gets easier, and life gets more exciting, more fulfilling, and more enjoyable. Your decision-making will improve because you create more options. In the words of John F. Kennedy, conformity is the jailer of freedom and the enemy of growth. Let's shake the snow globe together and reintroduce creative thinking into our lives. Thank you.